of a new age and the connection that comes with the internet, we are now able to share information that humanity, for the most part, has never seen before. Once this information was only known by a select few who guarded the secrets of who we were and where we came from, along with evidence of other forms of life on this planet. Today, we can see that there is evidence of other civilizations that came before our own. They left their indelible marks in the stone long before written records were made. We can find their vestiges in the far corners of the earth, on every continent, and under countless sacred structures. Just what are these vestiges? Though most people believe the megalithic culture is the oldest evidence of an ancient worldwide civilization, these other vestiges are even older than the megalithic structures that built along and above them, as if honoring them. We can say that these other vestiges are of a mother civilization, as they seem to be the oldest type of construction found on planet Earth. One can see that the rock itself takes on a mysterious character, and the shapes seem as if formed when the matrix was once soft, and not cut in the stone using conventional tools and methods. Everywhere one looks, we can see what looks like fingerprints forming canals and strange shapes, and possibly footprints pushed into the matrix. Here we can see at Chanquillo how the megalithic culture built walls around the vestiges of the mother civilization with their gigantic polygonal stonework. Examples of this kind of construction are seen all over Peru as well as elsewhere around the world. Just why did the megalithic civilization and more recent cultures like the Inca and Quilque revere these sites so much that they built on top and around them? Did they see these structures as built by their ancestors, or perhaps by the gods? What is known about these monoliths, called huacas here in Peru, is that they sit on psyche lines that radiate out from the most sacred building in the Inca Empire, the Qorikancha in Cusco. Psyche lines were used by the Incas ritual pathways for pilgrimages and for other sacred purposes. Could these lines be fracture zones that carry subtle geomagnetic currents through faults on the surface of the Earth? Today, scientists are beginning to discover that many ancient sites are built on such fault lines, and studies have shown that such fault zones draw in telluric currents as well as water pathways, creating geomagnetic hotspots. It seems that the ancients knew exactly where these lines of current flowed, and they put their quartz and calcite-rich monoliths on top of them to harness and concentrate these earth energies. The Hopi called such areas spots on the back of the fawn, and they were known to facilitate altered states of consciousness as well as to connect to the spirit realm. As we walk around Chanquillo in the foothills of Cusco, we can see how these monoliths take on a bizarre and mysterious appearance. Filled with niches, seats, basins, and water canals, as well as undulating and rectilinear shapes and forms, they seem more as art projects than buildings. What are the purposes behind the bizarre forms that we see here? Maybe because of the lack of historical evidence as to whom the builders of the mother civilization were, we should look at some unconventional interpretations, like those from mystics and clairvoyants who could see into the Akashic records, that great repository of all that ever was or ever happened since the dawn of time. According to the educator and psychic Rudolf Steiner, who viewed these records, There once was a type of early humanity who could master the elemental world just by using the power of his will. This type of humanity could remodel hills in such a way that the form afforded them joy and pleasure. He called these stone creations as schools, which serve for the cultivation of divine wisdom and divine art. Is this what we are seeing with the mother civilization formations? Are they the vestiges of these ancient schools of divine wisdom and art? Though we don't know for sure who created them, we do know that these constructions tell a story of a forgotten civilization, a civilization that intuitively understood their connection with Earth and the cosmos, and one who also possessed the ability to mold their world for joy and pleasure with the power of their will.
Bustling streets of Cusco, Peru, hidden in plain sight under the colonial grandeur of the Santo Domingo convent, lies one of the most mysterious and controversial ancient structures in the Americas, Qorikancha, the Golden Enclosure. Officially hailed as the most sacred temple of the Inca Empire, dedicated to the sun god Inti, Qorikancha's massive stone foundations whisper of a far older story, one that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. While the Spanish conquerors stripped its walls of gold and built their churches atop its ruins, they could not destroy the impeccable stonework at its core. Granite blocks, polished to a metallic sheen, are joined so tightly that not even a razor blade can pass between them. These aren't the crude remnants of a Bronze Age culture. They're the fingerprints of unknown builders possessing advanced technology. The precision and scale of Qorikancha's construction have sparked bold theories that the Incas did not build it, but rather inherited it from a lost, advanced prehistoric civilization, one that possessed techniques and knowledge now vanished from history. With multi-angled polygonal masonry, vitrified stone joints, machine-like drill holes, and seismic-proof design that modern engineers still admire, Qorikancha challenges our understanding of ancient history and the capabilities of our ancestors. Could there have been an earlier Andean civilization, one wiped out by some kind of cataclysm? A civilization that mastered the art of shaping and fitting stone with such elegance and durability, allowing it to last for thousands of years. What if the true builders of Qorikancha left behind not just stones, but clues to an entire forgotten chapter of human history? If you're fascinated by the prehistoric civilizations missing from our history books, embark on a remarkable journey with our ebook, Prehistoric Megastructures. This nearly 500-page volume is packed with images and in-depth explorations of some of the most astonishing and unexplained ancient structures ever discovered, monuments that were clearly built with advanced technology from a time long forgotten. There's a limited discount on the ebook, so make sure to click the link in the description or top pinned comment and uncover the mysteries that mainstream history refuses to acknowledge. At the southeastern edge of the colonial church of Santo Domingo in Cusco, Peru, lies one of the most compelling pieces of architectural evidence pointing to a lost mastery of stonework, the curved outer wall of Qorikancha. Smooth, Precisely carved and made from polished andesite blocks, this gently arcing facade defies not only the tools attributed to the Inca, but also the expectations of modern masonry. It is, in every sense, an architectural anomaly, one that has resisted damage through centuries of earthquakes, foreign conquest, and weathering. And yet, despite its resilience and elegance, its origin remains a subject of fierce debate. The wall curves outward in a perfectly uniform arc, hugging the modern street with an almost organic grace. It is made of large, tightly fitted andesite blocks, some over 1 meter tall and several tons in weight, each carved to match its neighbors so precisely that no mortar is needed. The curve itself is consistent throughout, forming what some have described as part of a perfect circle or ellipse. The stones are not stacked in flat, horizontal courses like brickwork. Instead, each row subtly adapts to the curve, and the individual stones are shaped to follow the radial lines of the arc, meaning each block had to be individually measured and carved to maintain the curvature. This is not a feature one typically finds in pre-industrial stonework, especially not in large-scale megalithic architecture. At first glance, the wall's precision might seem simply beautiful. On closer inspection, it becomes technologically provocative. To create such a wall today would require a detailed 3D plan, accurate surveying tools, and stone-shaping instruments capable of high-resolution measurements. That the stones also interlock along complex joints adds an additional layer of difficulty. This wasn't just an aesthetic decision, it was an engineering feat. The faces of the blocks are slightly convex. This convexity ensures that pressure is concentrated at the edges, enhancing the grip between stones. This subtle shaping was not an accident. It required an intimate understanding of stone mechanics. On the back side of the curved wall, you'll notice the typical knobs found on many megalithic stones around the world. But here, they are distinctly square, with precise right angles. These protrusions often appear in symmetrical patterns, especially on the mirrored sides of a window-like alcove. The arrangement suggests that something may have once been attached or fitted onto them, almost like interlocking pieces in a Lego-like system. The joints between blocks are so tight that not even a sheet of paper or a razor blade can fit between them. In several spots, these joints are not simple straight seams. They are multi-angled, zigzagging between adjacent blocks, increasing the contact surface and mechanical friction. Some of these joints appear fused or vitrified. There is a glassy sheen on certain seams, suggesting that intense heat may have been applied to partially melt the stone surface, a possibility that mainstream archaeology has yet to fully address. Alternative researchers argue that this vitrification may indicate the use of high-temperature stone fusion technology, perhaps using unknown tools or even advanced materials chemistry. Others suggest acoustic tools, or the manipulation of resonance frequencies to soften or levitate stone. While these ideas are speculative, they are rooted in a simple fact. The observable evidence cannot be easily reproduced with Bronze Age tools. This level of engineering is so far beyond the rest of Inca construction that it may represent a legacy of a far older and more technologically advanced culture, perhaps one that existed long before the Inca adopted Cusco as their capital. The Incas themselves claimed they did not build all the megalithic structures, referring to them as constructions left by the gods. If we go inside the temple, things get even stranger. One of the most striking anomalies is the series of trapezoidal doorways and niches, all aligned with astonishing accuracy. When you stand in front of one of these openings, you often see a perfect visual corridor through several successive chambers. These multi-room alignments are not random. They imply careful, intentional design, possibly connected to solar or ceremonial functions. Yet their technical execution, involving massive, individually shaped stones forming monolithic door frames and seamless transitions, suggests a construction technique far beyond simple stacking. Jay from the Voyager TV YouTube channel visited the site and measured each of the false windows with a digital protractor. He was stunned to discover that the bottom of all of them measured exactly 86 degrees. The top portion of these alcoves measures precisely 90 degrees, creating a subtle but intentional tapering. However, what makes this design particularly fascinating is its uniformity across great distances and its perfect integration into complex polygonal stonework. Roughly 70 kilometers away in the mountain stronghold of Ollantay Tambo, located in the Sacred Valley, another temple structure exhibits these exact same measurements. Inside its ruins, nestled high on the mountainside, are alcoves and false windows that mirror the 86 degrees design of Qorikancha, down to the smallest detail. This level of consistency across vast distances implies a shared blueprint or standardized system of measurement, something we associate more with industrial or modern architecture than with ancient empires lacking written technical records. Even the doorways within Qorikancha adhere to this angular discipline. At the base of every portal, where the stones flare outward, the same 86 degrees angle is found, repeated again and again with uncanny accuracy. These are not rough approximations, but mathematically precise constructions, executed in hard andesite stone with no margin for error. Inside the temple, there are numerous excavated stone blocks on display, blocks featuring drilled holes and extremely precise grooves. The drilled holes themselves are perfectly circular and plunge deep into the extremely hard stone. The holes are so clean and symmetrical that they resemble modern drill holes. If we look closer, we can see the tiny groove marks, which suggests some kind of machine could be used to drill this stone. On certain blocks, you also see shallow channels or T-shaped cutouts on Chi surface dot. These T-grooves are intriguing because they are as strongly reminiscent of the masonry at far older Tiwanaku in Bolivia, where bronze clamps were used to hold stones together. Some of the blocks feature peculiar indentations that resemble channels, suggesting they may have once been used for piping connectors or conduits of some kind that were part of some sort of hydraulic system. If we examine the door of the Moon Temple, we can see remarkably advanced engineering. Intricate stone walls, fitted without mortar, feature perfectly angled drill holes, their purpose still debated. The walls inside the temple are truly astonishing. Just look at this precise fitting that is connected with astonishing accuracy. A remarkably interesting detail can be found on the walls of the inner temple of Qorikancha, a feature so subtle it's often overlooked, yet so precise it may hold clues to a lost global tradition of megalithic engineering. Embedded between massive, multi-ton andesite blocks is a tiny, perfectly shaped stone, inserted with such meticulous care that it fits seamlessly into the larger structure. The precision is astonishing. No mortar, no filler, just exact geometry, snug enough to withstand centuries of seismic activity without shifting. In fact, this small block in the center is not accidental at all. This stone marks the point of stress relief. On its own, this might be dismissed as a clever local technique, But what makes it especially intriguing is that similar small stone insertions can only be found on the oldest, most mysterious, and most complex megalithic structures all around the world. For example, the wall at Ahu Vinapu on Easter Island, the Osirian of Abydos in Egypt, and even all the way to the Osaka Castle in Japan. Is this a simple coincidence, or an evidence for a now lost global prehistoric civilization? One of the most overlooked yet technically significant features of Qorikancha's construction lies in its corner joints. Specifically, the use of L-shaped stone blocks that seamlessly wrap around the edges of the walls. These cornerstones are not simply two stones abutting at a 90 degrees angle. They are single blocks meticulously carved into an L shape, designed to tie adjacent walls together into a unified structure. Again, we see the exact same technique all across the globe in Egypt. Alternative theorists suggest that the shaping of these blocks may have involved methods we no longer understand, ranging from unknown abrasion techniques, chemical stone softening, or even stone casting using lost geopolymers. Whatever the method, the result speaks of a knowledge system far more advanced than what conventional history attributes to the Inca. Long before Spanish boots echoed through the streets of Cusco, before crosses replaced solar discs and gold was melted into ingots for shipment to Spain, Qorikancha stood as one of the most resplendent sacred sites in the ancient world, a temple of light, gold, and celestial alignment. Historical chronicles, including those of early Spanish chroniclers like Garcilaso de la Vega and Pedro Chiesa de León, paint a picture of unparalleled magnificence. The temple's name, Qorikancha, is derived from the Quechua words Quri, gold, and Kancha, enclosure or sacred space, and it lived up to that name in every sense. Its outer walls, now bare and gray, were once completely covered in plates of solid gold, reflecting the sun's rays so brilliantly that from a distance, the temple appeared to be ablaze with divine light. Inside, the radiance only intensified. The inner sanctum of Qorikancha was said to contain a massive golden disc, symbolizing Inti, the Inca sun god. Mounted high on the eastern wall, this disc was aligned so that during the June solstice, the first rays of the rising sun would shine directly upon it, bathing the room in golden light and triggering ceremonial observances that marked the Inca New Year. Some accounts suggest that this disc also acted as a solar mirror, reflecting sunlight deeper into the temple's corridors, possibly into secret or symbolic chambers that responded to this precise astronomical moment. But this brilliant beacon of solar worship did not survive the conquest. When the Spanish arrived in the 1530s, they were staggered by the wealth of Qorikancha and promptly stripped it bare. Gold and silver were looted en masse, melted down into bullion to fill the coffers of the Spanish crown. The Golden Garden was uprooted. The great sun disk, rumored to be carried away or hidden by priests, was never seen again. Over time, the temple itself was buried under the convent of Santo Domingo, a Christian monument symbolically constructed atop the Inca holy site in a deliberate act of religious domination. What remains today are only the bones, the earthquake-proof stone walls, the tightly fitted blocks of the inner chambers, and the few scattered remnants of a once glorious structure. Yet, even in this skeletal form, Qorikancha still radiates mystery. All these observations feed into a tantalizing theory that the Andes were once home to a lost civilization with engineering capabilities far beyond what we traditionally credit to indigenous cultures of the 1st or 2nd millennium CE. This hypothetical civilization would have predated the Inca, perhaps by thousands of years, and could have been responsible for laying the foundations, literally, of sites like Qorikancha, Saqsayhuaman, and Ollantaytambo. Some proponents link this idea to global lost civilization theories, suggesting that after a cataclysm, like the end of the last ice age approximately 12,000 years ago, remnants of an advanced culture might have shared their building knowledge with survivors in different parts of the world. It's an intriguing attempt to explain why megalithic, precise masonry appears in places as disparate as Peru, Egypt, and Easter Island. For the Andes specifically, one could imagine an ancient people, call them the Andean Atlanteans for lack of a better term, who had developed techniques to shape and move stone with ease. They might have had metal tools superior to what we found, perhaps lost or melted down over time, or even machines to abrade or lift heavy rocks. Some radical ideas even involve sound technology, acoustic levitation of stones, or unknown energy sources to melt and reform rock. While these notions drift into speculative territory, they're inspired by real enigmas in the stones. Amid the ruin and loss that followed the Spanish conquest of Qorikancha, almost every trace of the Inca Empire's golden splendor was stripped away, melted, stolen, or destroyed. But one extraordinary artifact somehow survived the plunder, a remnant of sacred knowledge cast in gold, known as the Golden Altar Star Map. This relic, though rarely discussed in mainstream sources, is considered by some researchers to be one of the most important surviving Inca artifacts, not merely for its material value, but for what it records, a celestial map of the heavens as seen by the ancient Andean sky watchers. It is, to date, the only known star map in gold from the ancient world in South America, and perhaps the most direct visual testimony of the Incas' astronomical knowledge and spiritual cosmology. The star map, sometimes referred to as the altar of the cosmos, is said to have once adorned a sacred wall or pedestal within Qorikancha, likely beneath or adjacent to the great golden disk of Inti, the sun god. Crafted from thin sheets of gold and etched with symbolic carvings, the map depicts a sky filled with constellations known to the Inca, along with their mythological associations, stars and celestial groupings tied to deities, animals, and sacred narratives passed down orally through generations. Alongside the star map, another surviving fragment is referred to as the Golden Wall, a gilded sheet that may once have covered an entire temple wall or ceremonial backdrop. Today, only portions remain, but researchers speculate that this piece was part of a larger golden overlay system used throughout Qorikancha. While the Inca undoubtedly held the temple in the highest esteem, adorning it with gold, aligning it with the sun, and integrating it into their ceremonial life, the evidence suggests they were not its original builders. Instead, they were the inheritors of a structure so advanced in its engineering and design that even they may have viewed it as the work of gods or forgotten ancestors. The precision of the masonry, the use of L-shaped cornerstones, the presence of vitrified joints, polygonal stone blocks with seamless integration, mysterious niches, tool marks, and a design that integrates astronomical knowledge all point to a level of architectural sophistication that predates known Inca methods. It is plausible and increasingly compelling to consider that Qorikancha was built by an earlier, prehistoric civilization, one whose name and memory have been lost to history, yet whose knowledge was so refined that even thousands of years later, the structure remained standing, largely unaltered in form. The Inca, recognizing its sacredness and strategic importance, adapted it to their cosmology and culture, just as later the Spanish would build their convent upon it in an effort to overwrite both civilizations. This perspective reframes Qorikancha not as a standalone monument, but as part of a continuum of ancient inheritance, a relic of a time when human beings may have possessed a different kind of knowledge, one based not only on brute labor, but on advanced geometry, astronomical precision, and possibly even unknown technologies.
The Nazca lines of southern Peru are one of the most awe-inspiring mysteries on Earth. Located in the middle of a dry and inhospitable desert, we find over 1,000 geoglyphs etched into the earth on a truly massive scale. Some of these images are over 1,200 feet in length, which is about the same height as the Empire State Building. And hundreds of these perfectly straight lines stretch up to 30 miles across the Nazca Desert. No one truly knows why these massive lines were created in the middle of nowhere thousands of years ago. But in this video, I'm going to share why the Nazca lines contain a hidden code so advanced that it could actually rewrite history. And if you don't believe me, stick around to the end of this video because I'm also going to share why the Nazca lines are linked to other ancient sites thousands of miles away, such as Easter Island, the Great Pyramids, and even Angkor Wat in Cambodia. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey everyone, my name is Jonas and welcome back to Cosmic Consciousness. In this new series, I explore mysteries that I believe can help humanity evolve and awaken to higher consciousness. Now, there are so many mysteries about the Nazca lines, it's hard to even know where to begin, but the sheer volume of these lines is truly incredible. We've discovered over 1,000 geometric figures and drawings, and some researchers estimate that only 5 to 10% of all the geoglyphs have actually been identified. These straight lines that you can see here cover a combined distance of at least 800 miles. It's thought that these lines were created around 2,000 years ago by the Nazca civilization. However, we know very little about this ancient culture, which seems to have disappeared mysteriously around 1,500 years ago. The Nazca lines were only recently discovered in the 1930s when pilots began flying over this region, and that's because most of these figures are so large that they're not visible from the ground level. As previously mentioned, some of these shapes are as big as the Empire State Building, and yet they were created with precision. For example, these lines carved into the ground are not just straight, they're almost perfectly straight over miles and miles and often deviate by less than a meter. How was this accomplished by primitive people? Even something as simple as making parallel lines would be challenging at this scale, not to mention the complex shapes such as this spider, which exhibit a high degree of symmetry. And to increase the difficulty, many of these shapes are carved in one continuous line, such as this one. Again, how is this accomplished by primitive people? And this raises another question as well, because if the ancient builders couldn't even see the geoglyphs they were making, then why did they make them in the first place? I mean, what function did they serve? No one truly knows the answer to that question, and the purpose of these lines continues to be debated to this day. Some theorize that the Nazca lines were created as messages or offerings to the gods above. Others think that they were sacred pathways used in rituals, and still others claim that they were created as an astronomical calendar. And many of the Nazca lines are in fact astronomically aligned, which indicates that the builders had advanced knowledge. None of the explanations truly account for all of the strangeness found at this site. For example, I mean, just look at this. This isn't just scratching some lines in the earth. The builders were literally terraforming the terrain here in the middle of the desert. Only an extremely important reason could justify this scale of construction. But what is that? Here's a massive figure carved into a hillside, often called the Nazca astronaut. And I mean, what do you make of this? This is just incredible, and it leaves me wondering, who were they waving to? This monkey is another famous geoglyph which you've probably seen before, but have you ever stopped to consider that monkeys don't live in the desert? Here on this map you can see the territory of the Nazca civilization. The closest monkeys to this spot right here live hundreds of miles away in the Amazon jungle. Not only that, a team of scientists analyzed 16 different bird geoglyphs at Nazca and found that not a single one of them live around Nazca. They're all exotic species. For example, the hummingbird, the pelican, the condor, and the parrot can only be found hundreds of miles away from this region, which is kind of mind-blowing to think about. Were the Nazca people really traveling thousands of miles only to return home and draw exotic animals in the desert sand? This is another interesting clue that the creators of the Nazca lines had advanced knowledge that's difficult to explain. Now here's where things get even more interesting, because the Nazca lines clearly link to other ancient sites around the world. Over 600 miles away in Bolivia, we find the Saqsayhuaman lines. These Saqsayhuaman lines are a complete enigma. We have no idea who created them, and shockingly enough, they're even larger than Nazca and cover an area 15 times greater. Supposedly, the Nazca culture had nothing to do with this construction hundreds of miles away in Bolivia, so then why do these constructions look so similar? Even further away, traveling to Chile, we find an extremely impressive geoglyph called the Atacama Giant. Another massive image etched into the ground in the middle of nowhere, which also appears similar in some ways to the symbols seen at Nazca. Historians tell us that these geoglyphs were created by completely different cultures that didn't even know of each other, but if that's true, then how can we account for the similarities at these sites? But the mysterious connections between Nazca and other sites around the world gets even more incredible than this. YouTuber CFApps7865 uploaded a video showing what happens if you plot out the major Nazca lines over the entire Earth. And amazingly enough, they all intersect on the other side of the planet, directly over the megalithic Angkor Wat temple. Is that just an amazing coincidence, or was this engineered intentionally? Well, consider this. Here at the Nazca lines, we find an astonishing geoglyph that looks like a mandala. This is just a beautiful image. I really wonder what the creators were trying to communicate through this design. But look what happens if we lay it out next to mandalas from the Hindu religion, which originally constructed Angkor Wat Temple. Now let's look at some further connections. A Russian organization called geolines.ru has done some amazing work demonstrating that there is a hidden meaning encoded in these Nazca lines, because many of these lines point in the exact direction of other important sites around the globe. For example, this line directly intersects the Great Pyramid in Egypt, and this one points towards Easter Island. Now, it's easy to say at this point that this is all just coincidence. There's tons of lines here at Nazca, and of course, some of them are bound to intersect with other ancient sites around the world. But here's why this is not a coincidence. I'm about to share a phenomenal detail that conclusively links the Nazca lines to Easter Island. I haven't seen any other source online point out this detail, and what I'm about to show you, if you ask me, this is the final nail in the coffin that proves that Nazca is much more advanced and mysterious than anything we currently understand. But check this out. Here in Nazca, we have an image that's often called the parrot. It's a bird that has human-like feet, an arm-like appendage, and an oval in its stomach, which possibly represents an egg. Now let's travel 2,350 miles to Easter Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Here we find hundreds of the famous stone moai, and we also find carvings in the rock. And look what we find here. A bird-like figure with the same shape of beak, with human feet and hands, and an oval shape in the stomach. We can find this image in numerous locations around the island. You guys, this is simply incredible. It's really hard to claim this is a coincidence. It's basically a perfect match. But if this connection is legitimate, this alone could rewrite our understanding of history. And there's even more evidence to support this unknown connection between Peru and Easter Island. Because on Easter Island, there's an ancient megalithic wall called Ahu-Vinapu. This was built in a highly advanced style that just so happens to be an exact match with what we see in Peru. Check out this structure located thousands of miles away from Easter Island back in Peru. In both locations, we see this small keystone block that's surrounded by 4 bigger stones. And this is a signature by the builder. It's a fingerprint. It's an exact match. How can we explain this? Somehow there was advanced knowledge shared between these people separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Did a small society like the Nazca culture who lived in a desert sail all the way to Easter Island? Or did the Easter Island people come to Nazca and just start carving things in the ground? That seems just as unlikely. I mean, we currently don't have any good explanation for this. And what this means is that we're missing chapters from our history books. If you ask me, this is extremely convincing evidence that highly advanced intercontinental civilizations once existed on planet Earth who we now have no knowledge of. The secrets encoded in these ancient sites could help humanity open our minds and expand our consciousness. And here on this channel, that's what we're all about.
The Nazca lines are one of the most intriguing mysteries of ancient Peru. Thousands of geometric shapes, trapezoids, lines, strips, and spirals have been drawn on the desert surface for unknown purposes. Many people are familiar with the outlines of the most famous giant drawings: a spider, a condor, and a monkey. The question that has always puzzled archaeologists and others who study the history of South America is, how did they get there? Who made the Nazca lines? Why were they made? And made with such precision? The first real reports of the lines came from Peruvian military and civilian pilots who flew over the area in the 1920s. Located in southern Peru on the Nazca Plateau, the Nazca lines are pre-Columbian geoglyphs, or large designs or drawings that have been etched into the desert sands. Nearly 300 of them have been discovered so far, and many consist of plants or animals such as a hummingbird, spider, fish, lizard, dog, and a human. Other shapes include trees and flowers. They cover an area of roughly 1,000 square kilometers or 386 square miles. Some of them can only be spotted from the air, while others can be distinguished from surrounding foothills and other high places. They are believed to have been created around 500 BC, but that is just an estimate. The Nazca lines have puzzled archaeologists, historians, mathematicians, and others who have studied them extensively for decades. But few people know about the existence of another set of huge drawings that were only just recently discovered. The first of these were spotted by tourists who were flying over the Nazca Plateau in the 1990s. They are located between the Nazca Plateau and the city of Palpa. These geoglyphs are remarkably different from the Nazca lines. They are known as estrellas, or stars. This is what they look like from the air. These drawings or designs are nothing like the traditional Nazca geoglyphs. These designs represent geometric and other mathematical equations that consist of circles, squares, and points. It is hard to make out these designs from the surface. They look like sloppy and uneven rows of stones and lines that could have been drawn by dragging a foot or a stick. Stones or heaps of stones have been piled at various locations. Ancient and rotted poles have also been placed at the site of the estrellas, which may or may not have been used by the builders. This is one of the largest designs ever discovered in Peru. It is more than 130 meters or 142 yards in size. From a ground level view, it is nearly impossible to understand what is depicted. Academic science has largely ignored it. Some even call it nothing more than a tourist trap, which can be easy to understand. Yet, there are some who believe that whatever is depicted here has a much deeper meaning. As it turns out, this is not the only image of this kind. On the edge of this plateau is another similar design that was also just recently discovered. The design is marked on maps, and locals call it the mandala. It is similar to the mandala designs of ancient India, and it means a circle or geometric design that holds a great deal of symbolism in Hindu and Buddhist cultures. Its size is about 120 meters or 131 yards wide. In detail, it differs from an estrella. Parts of it are very uneven, and another part is located at the bottom of the gorge. At the same time, the proportions of this geoglyph are very precise. The outline of it looks perfect when viewed from above, and its construction is very complex. Located next to this creation is yet another interesting and perplexing design. It connects to both sides of a canyon. Located at each end, there are depictions of small stars. Located in the middle is a large star with 16 rays of light or sunlight protruding from it. Keep this in mind, as it is similar to another design that will be shown later. During a flight over the Palpa area in 2010, we were fortunate enough to find several similar images in the same area. These are rather large and complex designs and not always completely visible at first. They cannot be seen from satellite views of the area, and they are nearly impossible to spot from an airplane. The images only come into view with high-resolution photos. Part of this design can be seen through these pictures. A similar design with a much more complex pattern is located a few hundred feet away. In both cases, the design of each creation can only be spotted from the air. A bird's-eye view of this design offers a different perspective, and the existence of this creation only creates more questions and mystery. This might be the most difficult and creative geoglyph on the Nazca Plateau. The center of this design is clearly visible. There are 8 layered circles in total. The width of the central section is 35 meters or 114 feet. The width of the design is about 200 meters or 218 yards, about the length of 2 football fields. This is another view of the design. It is located near the crossroad. The center of the design is clearly visible, as well as a portion of the circles that are plotted on the diameter. The construction of this segment brings up an interesting detail that presents another mystery. The circles and the center of this design are created with rows of stones. On one side, the circles have been constructed with a dotted line that is difficult to spot. This would seem to indicate that the builder or builders used stones that were in the area around them. This brings up an interesting detail about this design. This design is invisible at ground level and still hard to distinguish from a small height, but viewed at a higher angle or elevation, it's clear that the designers created a huge, abstract, geometrically correct figure. That it could not be viewed at ground level or higher angle or elevation did not seem to concern them. Perhaps when the geoglyph was created, all details may have been visible, or perhaps it had been illuminated at some point. The mystery remains as to why it was built to begin with. Who or what was it for? What purpose did it have? These are questions that are difficult to answer. Further investigation of the Nazca region continues to yield new discoveries that create even more questions. Some of these designs have appeared in previous videos, but new details have only recently been uncovered. One example of this is a simple Estrella design. Located on a hill of natural or perhaps artificial origin, the central stone used in this design is clearly visible. It is surrounded by 8 stones located in a circle. 8 rays radiate from this circle and stretch quite far. The stones are arranged at regular intervals in a 100-meter circle. Beams were constructed without any particular distance between stones. Here is an entire group of figures that are drawn very close to each other. This design is much more complex. It contains much more detail. This is what the internal structure looks like. Crosshairs, corners, and lines are clearly visible around the large circle. Unfortunately, this design has been covered with sand. A lot of it has been lost, and it is no longer possible to create a detailed drawing. Nearby, there is a design which is very similar to the mandala shown earlier. This is how the center of this design looks like from the ground level. The lines of it are very similar to the traditional Nazca lines. The next picture appears to represent concentric circles. These figures are approximately the same size. They are concentric circles that have diameters of 28, 56, and 112 meters. We see that the center is drawn on the top of a small hill, and the circles themselves are constructed along the terrain. just 100 meters away, or 109 yards, we discovered the exact same image constructed in what appears to be the exact same way. Here is its center, the first circle, then the second. And we also see how the largest of the circles was constructed. Why was it necessary to draw or create circles in such a complex way? Why was it created to begin with? Who was it created for? The circles do not appear to be perfect from images taken directly above it, but a lot of the perception depends upon the angle which the drone camera is shooting at. At a great height, the two circles appear to be correct. The greater the height, the more uniform the circles appear to be. What the purpose of this was, or who it was for, remains unknown. Is another similar drawing or design. It also features a similar arc that traverses along a rather deep ravine and a very steep slope. The builders who constructed this design did not need to place it in this exact area. There was enough free flat space nearby. Distortions of a large circle passing along the bottom of the ravine are clearly visible, and that's because of the angle of the drone's camera.
Я нашел 6 таких рисунков, нанесенных на подобный.
I found only 6 such drawings, 4 of which were applied to complex relief.
Делал доклад и
Last year, when I gave a report on the Nazca lines, I showed this diagram. It roughly shows the locations of Estrella-like figures. On satellite maps, such images are practically invisible, and therefore, it was made according to very indirect and imperceptible signs. It had been suggested that some of the Estrellas could be connected by lines of stones. And this year, in February, I managed to make a trip and try to find the drawings in this place. Taking a trip like this was a risk. If nothing can be viewed from satellite maps of the area, it's quite possible that nothing will be found on the exact spot chosen for a closer investigation. The trip could have been a waste of time and not revealed much at all. This investigation would take us far away from the city of Nazca. It meant a trip across the entire Nazca Plateau, and then moving in the direction of the ocean using only local landmarks. Fate, however, smiled upon us. We did eventually find the right spot to wade through the river and make it to the other side. We did eventually reach the spot we had been looking for. However, this trip was still a gamble. We suspected something might be here, but we really wouldn't know until we could get a view from above. This is the area we wanted to be at. There were piles of stones that were located very close to the entrance of this gorge, but were they placed there by someone else, or were they just a natural part of the landscape? We still didn't know. But as we drew closer, the cluster of stones in what seemed to be giant arcs made by rows of stones against the uneven hillside revealed that this deserved closer investigation. As it turned out, the journey across the Nazca Plateau would not be a wasted exercise. We had found what we came to see. The first pictures and video delivered by the drone camera revealed an amazing picture. It's a figure of some sort that appears to resemble a star consisting of 8 rays and then a complex system of circles. untouched by time and the elements, this intricate internal construction of this geoglyph features many different elements. The drone footage revealed shapes that can only be seen from above. Crosses, points, lines, and intricate corners. Several separate circles are visible here, and there is also a star-shaped structure at the top of the hill. This is a whole group of previously undiscovered Estrellas. Time and shifting winds partially covered the geoglyph with sand, and it also had been damaged by a nearby road. The true size and shape of this design is reflected in this reproduction. The solid and thick lines represent rows of stones. Thin, solid lines are drawn with a stick or foot. The dots are separate piles of stones. The dotted lines are virtual lines on which stones were placed in a regular manner. The star featuring 8 rays and the great circle form a single system. The circles on the right and the star at the top were most likely drawn separately. Interestingly, the 2 circles on the right have approximately the same slope and proportions as the circles on the tourist Estrella, which was shown at the very beginning of the report, and which is located miles away from this place. It is assumed that the authors of both Estrellas are the same, and that the people who constructed these figures pursued a specific goal. There is another important detail to consider. The thick gray dotted line in this illustration represents the center line of the piles of stones that runs through the gorge and connects all Estrellas into a single combination. The next map shows a similar scheme involving large numbers of geoglyphs. 19 Estrellas, or groups of Estrellas, are united by a common line running along the bottom of this gorge and uniting all geoglyphs into a single combination. The total length is about 5.5 kilometers, or nearly 3.5 miles. At the 18th figure, however, the center line does not continue. The only exception to the diagram is the second geoglyph. It is off-axis and consists of 2 layered images. One design is lined with rows of stones and resembles the central part of the tourist Estrella. There are a large number of crosses and stones here, which appear to have been put into place as markings. This represents the coordinate grid for the second and possibly incomplete mandala design, which has been drawn by tracing over the surface. The following represents a sketch of these unique designs. It is interesting to note that these designs are rotated in a relative way to each other by 1.5 or 2 degrees. Many Estrellas, which we have seen and will see, have small inaccuracies. This may be largely due to the carelessness and imperfection of the builder's tools, but it is also quite possible that sometimes asymmetry was introduced by the builders deliberately. The reason for this is unknown. Number 3 is similar to the design that was shown earlier. It represents a star that is connected to the opposite slope of this gorge with a ray. There is a circle on this line, which is divided into 16 parts. And this is what the other slope looks like. A stick or post is clearly visible on the star, which could have been used in its construction or played a role in the use of this geoglyph, providing it was constructed with a use in mind and was not designed to be artwork or the work of someone's vivid imagination. This design shows that the center line passes in the shape of a circle. next geoglyph is number 4. This design looks much different from the previous examples. There are whole systems of symbols at work here, which may have a definite or important meaning. The quality of the design itself may also be significant. This example shows another unique sign in the form of 2 squares. They appear to be rotated relatively to one another and make up the central section of the mandala. For simplicity purposes, we'll call it a center or bud. Another noteworthy sign is how the axial lines interact with the geoglyphs. One line appears to go through the circle in an almost tangential or digressive way. The next axial line starts from the border of the center or the bud. This is geoglyph number 5, representing the bud and circles. The axial line here is still clearly visible. It stretches to geoglyph number 4, which has already been examined. At this location, the gorge becomes very narrow and makes a small zigzag feature. The Estrellas here appear to carry a number of designations, such as possibly designating the turn of an axle. The next group is also unusual, consisting of a bud and triangles. The location of the triangles appears to indicate the slopes of the gorge itself. The next geoglyph is also a bud and triangles that appear to point along the gorge to the nearest open location. This is unlike any other Estrella, since the triangles appear to indicate turns in the gorge itself in the narrowest of areas, as if it were almost designed for aircraft entering or departing the area. The shots taken from the overhead drone at least seem to show this is what the triangles may have been for. A sketch of the 5th and 6th geoglyphs reveals another interesting feature. The adjustment of the angles of the geoglyphs to the axial lines is clearly visible. But what purpose did it serve? The 7th design is remarkable in that the bud is superimposed on the triangles. There are several other geoglyphs that are remarkably similar to each other. The 10th design represents a simple bud that appears to mark an axial break. Other remarkable finds may reveal clues about when the geoglyphs were made, and possibly why. The 8th design, for example, has many prints or tracks that were made across it at a later date. Some of them belong to modern motorcycles which have traversed this area, such as the clearly visible trail on the 9th geoglyph. However, many of the tracks also appear to be uneven and may not have been caused by modern transport. It may be possible that an old road from an early Spanish colonial period passed through this section of the gorge. Large fragments of pottery from the colonial period, possibly made with a potter's wheel, could be found throughout the gorge. We sent our drone camera to fly over the axial line, which clearly reveals how it was made. There are heaps of stones here, interspersed with short lines. The 17th Estrella that we looked closely at is somewhat different from its predecessors and creates even more questions. It has an irregular structure and many of its details are not comprehensible at this point. Further investigation and study here may yield additional answers. The schematic drawing of the Estrella provides a clearer picture. This design is connected by a straight line with what appear to be several figures. This would seem to imply an overall plan for this design. This may be a large group of several Estrellas that are each more than 1 kilometer or a little more than half mile in size. It is crossed by several diameters on which short lines are clearly visible. From the ground level, this diameter is barely visible, but from above, it begins to take on an entirely new shape that appears to serve some sort of purpose. Stones were discovered on the slope. A row of stones were also found passing through the center of the geoglyph, which, by the way, looks incomprehensible and sloppy from the ground level. Further, the line passes through the center and stretches to the opposite slope and even slightly across the plateau. This is the end of the entire Estrella group. After the 18th, neither axial nor other geoglyphs were found. However, the area still merits further investigation. In addition, Estrellas have been spotted in other areas, one of which is not all that far away from the Estrella Gorge. While it may be close by, it does not appear to be connected with the axial group. This Estrella is also not visible on satellite maps and is nearly impossible to see from an airplane. It was discovered by complete chance. This is the most complicated Estrella that has been discovered to date. Moreover, after editing this video, it became clear that this was only part of what is likely a much larger picture. Even with the limited pictures and videos, it appears that the people who designed this had some specific plan or project in mind. By this, I mean that they knew exactly what they were building and designing and why. There are a lot of markings and other small details around this Estrella, which serves to partially conceal it. The design, like many similar others, is applied over the ancient Nazca lines. Axis lines emerge from the figure, which may possibly end in other figures. Some diameters appear to go far enough, hundreds of meters away. This creates questions about who did this and why it was done. And it would be quite natural to talk about their authors and purpose. However, this will be part of another investigation. There are layers of these designs that are still being discovered. We know where some of them are, but not all. In all probability, there are a lot more, and they raise new questions. In this diagram, for example, you can clearly spot a dark square between numbers 3 and 4. This is also a large image with an axial line that passes through it. It appears to belong to another mysterious group and type of geoglyphs. These include strange drawings, as well as geometric images that are applied to the ancient Nazca geoglyphs and appear to interact with them. This investigation shows that they exist, but the meaning of them hasn't been determined. It's only safe to say that there are a lot of them. Not all of them have been photographed yet. Another trip will be required to document them and hopefully find out what purpose they may have served, if any. However, we can make the following assumptions about what has been discovered. These designs were not recently created and are not designed to draw tourists to the area. More than 100 of geoglyphs like this have been discovered so far, and it's likely there are many more. They are also scattered over a fairly large area that correspond to the ancient settlements of the Nazca population. Many of these geoglyphs are drawn on the traditional Nazca lines. Fragments of ancient ceramics can often be found on the Estrellas, which indicates their pre-Hispanic origin. Another point to make is this. Archaeologists now believe that the Huari culture of Peru absorbed the Nazca culture and people. The Huari culture is credited for creating the tokapu, which is a set of signs that are often depicted on textiles and ceramics. And these symbols are very similar to the details of the Estrella designs or geoglyphs that have been just recently discovered. It's also possible that, given the later age of the Estrellas when compared with the Nazca lines, that these creations were just a continuation of the construction of geoglyphs. It's also possible that these developments took place in the Huari culture, which continued up until the Spanish conquest of Central and South America. Theories abound about who created the Nazca lines and why. Anthropologists, ethnologists, and archaeologists alike have studied these areas extensively. Some suggest they were created to be seen by ancient gods. Still others suggest the figures suggest constellations of stars in nearby solar systems. And there are some who believe they have something to do with the directions of winter solstice and equinox sunset. The purpose of the Estrella figures and why they were made may never be discovered. They remain as much of a mystery as the Nazca lines, which continue to create new theories as to why they were built and who or what they were built for.
Finally comes the solemn moment. We're going up the plateau. It's even on the road signs. We are on the viewing tower at the height of about 15 meters, facing the plateau, the official name of which is Pampa San Jose, known as the Nazca Plateau or Desert. It is here that the tourists first get to know geoglyphs. Let's not break the tradition and have a look at the geoglyphs from here. This place has the highest density of geoglyphs per unit of area. It's about 20 kilometers to the city of Nazca from here. The plateau itself has an area of just over 300 square kilometers. But this is not the only place where these geoglyphs can be seen. Lines like the ones in Nazca can be seen near the town of Pisco, near the Paracas Peninsula, 200 kilometers north, and 50 kilometers south of Nazca, in the mountains, at a height of 2,000 meters. At this height, it's difficult to have a look at anything, but nevertheless, you can see clearly a huge strip with piles of stone around it. You can also see the paw of a giant 200-meter-high lizard, which was damaged greatly during the construction of the Pan American Highway. If you look to the west, in the direction of the Pacific Ocean, you can have a good look at the huge group of geoglyphs. Strange as it is, there are no schemes, and the guides do not tell about what tourists see from the tower. A detailed plan of this geoglyph was done a long time ago. It's a very curious group of lines, which brings together the so-called trapezoid, reduced triangle, which is connected to these lines, and 3 unique patterns. We've seen part of one of them, the lizard, and the other 2 are very interesting. They are called the tree and hands. We will talk about them later. And if you have a look at the map, it's seen clearly that the whole combination of all these lines was drawn as a whole. That is, the builders knew perfectly well what should be there and where it should be. Moreover, the trapezoid, the zigzag leaving the latter, and the tree are drawn with a continuous line, narrowing towards the end. The total length of the line is more than 5 kilometers. That is, there was a significant land surveying and plain physical activity of cleaning stones off the surface. Now we are moving to the next observation point, and I think we can talk about the history of discovery of this phenomenon. Rumor has it that it was Pedro Cieza de Leon who mentioned Nazca lines for the first time in the Spanish chronicles of the 16th century, when he traveled around these places at the beginning of the Spanish conquest. He described Inca roads passing through valleys and deserts, and literally wrote the following, that there were trial markers somewhere amidst sands to guess the paved path. It should be noted that he knew about Inca roads and was likely to have just them in mind. And, as we can see, there is no sand here, only rocky surface, with a large and chaotic jumble of lines, more likely to mislead the traveler than to point to the right direction. There is a point, better informed in my opinion, that these lines were first discovered at a height, with the start of regular flights between Lima and Arequipa. Well, be that as it may, 1927 is the date of the official discovery of Nazca lines, when they were first described by Peruvian archaeologist Toribio Mejia Hasepe. In 1939, they fell under notice of Paul Cossack, an American who heard about these lines at the archaeological conference in Lima and began to deal with them directly. He was the first to hire a plane to make high-quality images, which were then shown to the whole world. Another momentous event happened in 1940. Paul Cossack hired Maria Reiki as an interpreter. She was born in Germany, studied maths and geography there, and settled in a hut on the edge of the plateau in 1940. She dedicated the rest of her life to studying these ancient figures. She covered the construction of that tower, where we had our first observation. She also hired guides at her own expense in the tourist boom periods. Her studies are still considered the most reliable. She has awards from the Peruvian government. And thanks to her, the Nazca lines are now listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Geoglyphs have risen to international fame after the release of books and films by the famous German author and paleocontact advocate Erich von Däniken in the 1970s. geoglyphs became known as landing strips for alien ships, which literally caused the tourist boom, a huge inrush of tourists who, unfortunately, inflicted serious damage to the desert and the very ancient signs. We are now at the second observation point. It is a group of mounds near the Pan American Highway. Tourists are rarely brought to this place, but you can easily get here with a private vehicle. This place is interesting because you can get closer to the geoglyphs to take a close look. This place meant the world to the ancient builders, who used it when marking their figures. When trying to call the sketch map to mind, despite all the apparent chaos, the ancients did have a certain construction regularities. They used a fairly limited number of elements, such as trapezoids, or truncated triangles, large rectangles, stripes, or lines to draw zigzags, or which were simply drawn on long distances, including figures and spirals, which could be identified as a separate category since they had similar functions. We already know a great combination of geoglyphs, which were examined from the observation tower. Well, it is not the only combination of such a nature. Similar groups of lines are fairly common. The well-known monkey, which is often used as one of the symbols of the tourist business in Peru, is part of a great combination of lines, including a trapezoid, zigzag, figure, and even a spiral-shaped monkey tail. And all this is a single, continuous line. The desert has a lot of different combinations, with lines connected to trapezoids, groups of lines combined into larger units. There are also the so-called line centers. These are the points which have multiple lines coming from them. There are several dozens of known points, with us standing on one such very large center. As you can see, we have here a large number of quite long lines stretching over several kilometers. This mound gives rise to the line, which merits detailed consideration. In the 1970s, the astronomer and professor Gerald Hawkins, who conducted research here, pointed out that the geometrical accuracy of construction of geoglyphs was above the photometric capabilities that existed at the time being. And it should be noted, it was not a bad result for the ancients. And now, this line confirms Hawking's findings. This 10-kilometer line is clearly visible on satellite maps. And when you create a link between the tangent points using a straight line, you will see that the deviation of our straight line from the ancient line will not exceed 1.5 meters. It can be argued that it is almost a perfect line, a perfect straight line. And these deviations are quite likely to occur due to survey error of the satellite, which might have not been located exactly above the line. It should also be noted that a quarter of this line passes through a quite challenging terrain. Why are the Nazca geoglyphs considered one of the unsolved mysteries of history? And what makes them unsolvable? First and foremost, it is their unique straightness, accuracy of geometrical shapes, unusually large dimensions, and enormous number. If you look at the geoglyphs on the satellite map, or none the worse, take a look at the plateau at a height, you will be stricken by an extraordinary surreal picture. Vast stripes diverging in multiple directions, lines fleeing to the horizon, All this looks like some kind of alien intervention, as if someone slashed the desert to pieces with an unusual weapon or some huge tool. There is a good comparison that the desert is kind of ruled with a giant hand, resembling a chalkboard at the end of a geometry lesson. An important point is worth mentioning. Many researchers, and I generally agree with them, come to the conclusion that the geoglyphs were not built to be viewed from the ground, rather to be viewed at a height for a better perception. We will keep coming back to this point, but I guess you may have noticed another point already. When we viewed the geoglyphs from the ground, from observation points, all of this does not look so impressive. Here on the plateau, the surface is flat, but on surfaces having some small bumps and more challenging terrain, the geoglyphs are perceived only if you are standing exactly on the boundary, with a straight line clearly visible from this spot. But if you step a little bit aside, an almost perfectly straight line turns into some pile of stones, into a muck pile, and simply disappears in rough terrain. And if it is a great combination of lines or a giant figure, we cannot even figure out what exactly is depicted on the desert surface, which makes it absolutely necessary for us to climb to a specific altitude. Especially worth mentioning are figures, which are relatively few compared to the tens of thousands of lines and trapezoids. Plots from some of them can be found on the items of the Nazca culture. In the meanwhile, they are totally different from the style of figures on pottery and fabrics, and have a kind of purely modern touch. Back in her day, Maria Reiki worked hard to determine how it was that the ancients managed to draw such accurate, beautiful, smooth curves that resemble the work of a modern graphic designer. It should be noted that it was necessary not only to make a sketch, but also to move and turn this figure into a huge image, sometimes even a gigantic one. The largest group of figures is 400 meters long. In general, the figure matter is the most interesting, in my opinion. It carries a lot of surprises, and we will dwell on it in detail.
6 kilometers south of Pampa de Lamas, in an ancient city cut by a mysterious line, there's another interesting archaeological site, the Chanquillo fortified temple. But before we climb up the hill and carefully examine this amazing structure, it is necessary to say a few words about the monument, 13 towers, located in the immediate vicinity of the temple fortress. On the crest of a small granite hill, there are 13 towers from 2 to 7 meters high. The distance between them is about 5 meters. Date of construction, the middle of the first millennium BC. In the year 2000, archaeologists made the assumption that this is an ancient astronomical observatory. A point was found at the end of a long corridor in the nearest ruins, from which the 2 outer towers indicated the sunrise on the summer and winter solstices. There is a large number of articles and films where archaeologists talk about their discovery. Upon closer inspection, one can find that the towers are tied exclusively to the relief. Their design and the gaps between the towers are not oriented towards the observation point. And the observation point itself is not distinguished by anything special. In Casma Valley, the ancients knew about the days and the solstices, and many structures are oriented towards these astronomical events. For example, the Sichin Alto monumental complex is focused on the 2 astronomical events at once, the sunset of the June day and the sunrise of the December solstice, which are on the same line as this geographic zone. The complex Las Aldas, located 20 kilometers to the south, is oriented along a line perpendicular to the direction of these 2 astronomical events. It is possible that the 13 towers are indeed the oldest astronomical observatory in South America, but it is possible that these are just pedestals that VIPs climb during the holidays. Much more interesting is the object which is less popular and which is considered to be the part of this ancient observatory. So, the Chanquillo Forest Temple. The beginning of construction dates back to 600 BC. The structure was built on a granite hill on a difficult terrain. The object is called a forest because it has massive walls which look like modern defensive structures, and also because during the archaeological excavations, ceramic figures of warriors were found on the territory of the monument. A temple is usually what all objects of unknown purpose are called, especially since there are no traces of any permanent residence here, and it is quite remote from residential buildings. Most amazing, most mysterious feature of the object is its unusual contours, its appearance visible only from great heights. Nothing like this was built neither before nor after the construction of the Chanquillo temple in the pre-Incas era. The relief is very rugged here. The outer eastern wall is tens of meters lower than the central buildings. But this did not prevent the builders from creating such perfectly calibrated and precisely matched outlines of the structure. Obviously, the facility the size of 8 football fields was built according to a single project. The northern walls are the arcs of concentric circles, and from the south there are perfectly executed curves composed of 4 arcs of concentric circles of different radii. The orientation of the object is amazing. Its inner rectangular room is oriented to the line connecting the winter and summer solstices. The western walls are built perpendicular to this direction, and the eastern walls are oriented exactly in the north-south direction. It should be noted that the ruins and remains of huge areas in this part of the valley are also oriented along the line connecting the winter and summer solstices. The military use raises many questions. Although the walls are massive, they are not high. The outer wall has 5 entrances. There are no sources and reservoirs of water in the structure, and also there are particularly no traces of overlapping of internal buildings. In the hot Peruvian climate, the defenders of the fortress could not hold the line for any significant time. There is a higher section of the hill next to the Chanquillo, which makes the strategic value of the structure even less. It is unlikely that such an object was used for military purposes. The walls are made of granite rubble. The passages in the walls have well-preserved ceilings made of trees, which grow in abundance in the valley. Sometimes there are traces of plaster. It is believed that the temple was completely plastered and painted yellow and white. As archaeologists tell us, the structure was abandoned in antiquity, deliberately destroyed and walled up. The builders stuck to certain technologies. Apparently, at first, external, relatively narrow walls were built, then the voids were filled with stones. This is how the outer walls were built. And this is the inner, artificially raised section of the structure, where the thoroughness and precision of construction becomes visible. A smooth rounding of the outer wall, turning into a perfect straight line. Very unusual structures inside the third perimeter. These are 2 round towers built according to the same scheme, but slightly deployed relative to each other. The diameter of the outer wall of the towers is 40 meters, the inner one is 20. Each has 5 entrance sluices, 3 in the outer wall, 2 in the inner one. To get to the very center, you have to walk an intricate path. The towers are very badly destroyed, but in each one there are remains of niches and pedestals. Next to the towers, we see a rectangular structure, the only building in the traditional style similar to a temple of a rich person's residence. Archaeologists call it the Temple of the Pillars, after the remains of the pillars found here. The interiors have plaster floors, traces of plaster, and partial ceilings. Remains of stucco molding and ornaments have been preserved on the pillars. A large fragment of the ornament was found inside one of the rooms. But these tracers are very few, since in ancient times the building was deliberately and meticulously destroyed. Based on the materials from a drone, a photogrammetric 3D model was created, in which it is easy to see the inner details of this structure. Many of these small structures resemble plinths or pedestals. They are usually round. It is hard to say what they're used for. Perhaps statues were erected on them, bonfires were made, or guards were stationed. Each of the 5 external entrances has a similar circular pedestal. Next to the Temple of the Pillars, there is an unusual stepped pedestal with graceful rounded contours. It was definitely important if it was built in such an inconvenient place. The pedestal blocks almost of the entire passage between the Temple of the Pillars and the wall. One more interesting feature. In this area, ridges of dark brown rock run along the rolling hills, which are clearly visible against the background of light granite. This brown loose rock is magnetic. On satellite maps and on aerial photography, it is clearly visible that the object is built on the conjunction of 2 such ridges. One of them goes exactly through the centers of the round towers. This ridge is clearly visible between the towers themselves. Perhaps this is a coincidence and has nothing to do with Chanquillo. But it is possible that these geological features were important for ancient architects. During the construction, they saw this, but they placed the centers of the towers exactly on the same ridge. What was the purpose of this object? Why did the ancient builders put so much effort to get graceful, perfectly calibrated, and such unusual outlines of this difficult terrain visible only from a great height? Why is it so precisely oriented? Spatial modeling made it possible to estimate the errors that had to be taken into account when applying the finished plan to the relief. Estimates are very, very approximate. Some where builders were helped by an eye, some were by experience and methods of measurement, but somewhere on the contrary, additional difficulties arose due to the relief, which is smoothed out on the 3D model. In general, when drawing complex concentric curves, the builders took into account these differences in distances and applied to the terrain a contour that has no noticeable distortions, which we now see on the coordinate grid. In the end, the resulting orthographic projection looks flawless. How the ancient builders did this without any precise measuring instruments or with some sort of control from a height remains a mystery. Being inside the object or nearby, you cannot even imagine that the structure has such amazing contours. But what or for whom were the 2 identical towers built? Did they contain artifacts, or did they contain people, oracles, healers? Chanquillo was a very important and significant place for the ancients. The desert in front of the hill is literally strewn with fragments of pottery. What Rituals or ceremonies were carried out here. According to historians, the system of beliefs was shamanism, which is significantly different from the modern, largely formal religion. Or maybe something was happening here that is beyond our understanding. We can only hope that new ways of studying and modern technology will help us unravel the exciting mystery of the Chanquillo temple forests.
Across to the one side of the eastern side of the temple, we have these stones mark the movement of the sun throughout the year. And this is the work of Jim Allen, and you can see here as well. It's a remarkable sight and remarkable discoveries. And here we have, basically this encodes what we're seeing here, and you can see the movement as we go through here. So each one of these represents a different movement of the sun here for the different times of the year, and this will be the equinox in the center, and we have the extremes of the solstices on either side. And so if this is the case, this is very intriguing, because this suggests, as discovered by Arthur Poznański, that indeed this site could be up to 17,000 years old based upon the Archaeo-Astronomy of the temple.
Located high on the Andean plateau of South America, in the country of Bolivia, can be found the ruins of a once mighty civilization, and amongst them the clues to one of history's most unique and enduring mysteries. What was this place? When was it built? How in the world did these people survive in ancient times at nearly 13,000 feet or 4,000 meters of altitude, well above the tree line, in a place seemingly antithetical to large populations and civilization itself? Why build a city here, where crops are difficult to grow, and the struggle for simple existence is a daily battle? And then there's the form of the city itself. Just how was this stonework achieved? Some of the remnants left to us are both unique and utterly remarkable in their design. A seemingly playful style of endless, perfectly shaped corners, angles, channels, and even tiny drilled holes, formed with an obvious mechanical precision into very hard stone, an aspect of these ruins that is rarely explored and then never by the mainstream. Known today as the twin sites of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, there has been considerable controversy around just when they were originally built. If you ask mainstream academia, the consensus is generally that it was founded around 110 AD and went on to eventually collapse around 1000 AD. This estimation of the age of Tiwanaku, made around 2012, is derived entirely from the results of C14 radiocarbon dating and another technique known as obsidian hydration dating. And although there have been carbon-14 results from organic material found at the site going back to 1500 BC, these results have been dismissed as unreliable. Even so, this date of 1500 BC isn't close to the date suggested by other evidence for the true age of this mysterious megalithic city in Bolivia. The man who was responsible for the vast majority of the excavation, research, and even protection of the site in our modern era was Professor Arthur Poznański, an Austrian born in Vienna in 1873, and he spent nearly 50 years working, researching, and publishing on Tiwanaku, work for which he was widely recognized for in Bolivia before eventually passing away in La Paz in 1946. Just a year before that, in 1945, his life's work was culminated in the production of the magnificent volumes known as Tiwanaku, the Cradle of American Man. These books are hard to find and quite expensive when you do, but thanks to the supporters of this channel in the last couple of years, I've been able to source them, and will be their caretakers for a while as I use them for research and share the results with you all here. In Poznański's work, spread across 4 volumes that span a vast array of topics, He dates not the founding of the city, but rather the second period of occupation at Tiwanaku to the period around 15,000 BC. That's 17,000 years ago, a date unsurprisingly scoffed at by modern academia, who point to radiocarbon dating as a rebuttal, and on that basis simply dismiss Poznański's work. But just how valid is this dismissal? After all, carbon-14 dating might just be the last time somebody was buried there, or started a campfire there. It says nothing about the age of the stonework itself. Although Poznański's research was done before radiocarbon dating was a thing, he didn't just pull the figure of 15,000 BC from thin air. Rather, it is the result of studies of the geological and climatic history of the region, connections to now extinct flora and fauna, semi-fossilized animal remains, folklore, cultural history, and Tiwanaku's connections to other ancient cities of the Americas, studies of erosion at the site, and most significantly, astronomical dating based on the alignment of a structure known as the Calais-Saya, which is much more than simply a ceremonial space. It is, in fact, a very accurately constructed solar observatory. Quoting Arthur Poznański from his summary in the chapter of the probable age of Tiwanaku, quote, "If one wished to collect all of the ideas about the great age of the civilization of Tiwanaku with the attendant bases and proofs, one could fill a whole book. But we feel certain that in the preceding paragraphs we have outlined in a clear and synthetic form the nature of such proofs, which are astronomical, anthropological, paleontological, geological, petrographic, and sociological. By consulting the literature cited in the notes accompanying the text, complete and precise information may be had about all the subjects which have been treated very hastily in the present chapter." End quote. Funnily enough, and despite mainstream archaeology's brusque dismissal of Poznański's primary work, much of his observations in these history-adjacent scientific fields like geology and astronomy have in fact been validated and strengthened by modern research in recent years. So, where does the truth lie here? I hope you'll join me as we investigate just what's behind these claims and see if we can shed some light on the possible origins of one of history's most unique puzzles, the incredible remains of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, high up on the Altiplano of Bolivia. So before we get into the astronomical dating of Tiwanaku, let's quickly cover another couple of points made by Poznański that speak to a potentially vast age for the complex. He identified remains from Tiwanaku in the same strata layer in the soil that also contained a skull from a toxodon, an elephant-sized hoofed mammal that existed in South America during the Pleistocene and went extinct around the time of the Younger Dryas, roughly 11 to 13,000 years ago. Some of the artwork at Tiwanaku also seems to point to other extinct species from this period. There are many depictions of large cats amongst the carvings, which today are all classified as pumas. But in that case, as Poznański points out, why do only some of these show cats with very large canine teeth, while others do not? Is it possible that these represent both pumas and smilodons, the so-called saber-toothed tiger? The name saber-toothed tiger is a bit of a misnomer. They aren't closely related to the tiger at all, but they did exist in South America and were one of many megafauna who went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene. Now, the primary method that Poznański used to pin a date of 15,000 BC to the second period at Tiwanaku was astronomical dating, based on changes in the obliquity of the ecliptic, analysing the alignment of the solar observatory, known as the Calais-Saya, to the precise locations on the horizon of the sunrise during the solstices. The ecliptic is the plane projected by the Earth's orbit around the Sun, more or less the disk in which all of the planets orbit. The obliquity of the ecliptic is the angle between the plane of the Earth's equator and the plane of the ecliptic. As most people know, the Earth's axis is tilted, so that angle today is approximately 23.5 degrees. This tilt in the Earth's equator gives us the seasons as we orbit the Sun. Summer in the northern hemisphere occurs when it is tilted towards the Sun, and 6 months later, on the other side of the Sun on our orbit, it's tilted away, so it's cooler and hence winter. The degree of this tilt is not fixed, however. There is a slight oscillation to it, and its value swings between 22.1 degrees and 24.5 degrees in a cycle that takes around 41,000 years to complete. This motion of the change in the Earth's tilt is but one of several long-term motions of the Earth, loosely known as Milankovitch cycles. With careful analysis, and due to this change in the obliquity of the ecliptic, the exact location on the horizon of the sunrise changes, very gradually, over time. The solar observatory of the Callicissai was constructed as a marker for the sunrise on the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. Poznański set out to measure the difference in the obliquity of the ecliptic at sunrise on the solstices between his time, around 1930, and when the alignment would have been precisely matched to the construction of the Callicissai. It turns out that the structure also aligns with the locations for the sunsets on the solstices, I think making it undeniable that the Callicissai is absolutely a solar observatory and not just some sort of coincidence. But this discovery would only be made long after Poznański had passed away. In his efforts at using this technique to date Tiwanaku, Poznański enlisted the methods of Sir Norman Lockyer, one of the pioneers of astroarchaeology. Quote, "Since olden times and also in our day, the question regarding the age of Tiwanaku is one which has fascinated scholars and laymen alike. Since these ruins were already debris in the period of the Inca Empire, capricious commentaries and conjectures were made about their existence and the men who built them, and especially about their age. Thus it is that until a little while ago, the chronological aspect of Tiwanaku constituted an almost indecipherable enigma. Only after conceiving the idea of investigating the age of these remains of human activity in prehistoric America, the most notable ruins which have come down to us, and using astronomical resources to this end, has a slight ray of light penetrated this mystery. It is not a new thing to study the age of archaeological monuments by astronomical means. Perhaps the person who carried out this class of investigations with most skill and understanding was Sir Norman Lockyer, president of the Physical Solar Observatory of London, who, in 1909, in his detailed work Stonehenge and Other British Stone Monuments, supplied the necessary foundation for the methodological investigation of the epochs in which there were constructed the monuments of remote antiquity. In these works, which we can call definitive, the author employed the method of approach of the learned Sir Norman Lockyer, or specifically used exclusively as a basis for the calculations the change of the obliquity of the ecliptic. In other words, the comparison of the ecliptic marked on the temple of the sun of the second and third periods, and that of the present time. Through the facts expounded in the preceding chapters, it has been proven beyond all doubt that the Temple Callicissai was a true solar observatory located on the astronomical meridian, and at the same time a magnificent stone calendar. For reasons also set forth in previous chapters, it has been noted that when the observer stands at the center of the west wall of Callicissai of the second period, the north and south pillars at the east wall are so located that the sun would rise at the solstices on the outer corners of these pillars. Also, approximately at the center of the building, let us say at the middle of the monumental perron, the sun appears on the morning of the equinoxes. Now then, if, at the solstices, one observes the sunrise without the aid of instruments, it will be noted that it does indeed still come up at the corners of these pillars. However, if we examine this phenomenon with precision instruments, we note a difference of approximately 18 minutes, which represents the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic between that of the period in which Callicissai was built and that which it has today. This difference has served as the basis for the calculation of the age of Tiwanaku." End quote. Poznański spent years on the site carefully examining the alignment of the Callicissai, and also enlisted the help of several astronomers, like Professor Rolf Müller from the German Astronomical Mission, who spent several years on site confirming his results. The 18 minutes of difference in the obliquity of the ecliptic that is currently shown in the alignment of the structure was applied to the curve constituted by the formula of extrapolation recommended by the Ephemeris Conference of Paris in 1911. This formula produced a date of 15,000 BC, when the alignment would have been accurate, presumably the founding of the structure, which was built in the second period at Tiwanaku. When this date was published by Poznański and by the astronomers from Europe that accompanied him, it was unsurprisingly met with fairly strong criticism, most of which just dismissed the findings with terms like absurd and with no scientific refutation. Jose Imbeloni, a supposed scholar at the time, attempted to debunk these results, but in his efforts he confused the precession of the equinoxes with the variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic, two entirely different cycles, and also used incorrect measurements of the structure in his calculations by not distinguishing between the works of the second and third period. Not a good look. Poznański's conclusions were confirmed by professional astronomers during his time, but despite this, he was well aware, almost prescient in fact, that both technology and our ability to make these observations might improve in the future, and that his work could be built upon. Quoting Poznański, quote, "We have not the least doubt that someday our measurements will be controlled by competent geodetists or astronomers, and possibly certain errors or omissions will be rectified, which escaped us through faulty personal judgments or for other reasons. In spite of this, we are convinced that the way has been opened for the study of the stone calendar and the foundations laid for the calculation of the age of Tiwanaku. We feel also that our observations will be of help to those who, in the future, establish themselves in the region under study, and having the necessary time and resources, face the study in all its amplitude, correcting errors which we may have made, and thus shedding greater light on the purposes for which that magnificent temple and stone calendar was constructed, and on the age of these notable ruins." End quote. Poznański's prediction that his work would be improved upon in the future was indeed correct. And here we can find a very interesting connection to something mentioned earlier, that of a brief glacial period followed by a benign climate on the Altiplano. In modern times, the same exercise of using astronomical dating and the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic at the Calcasieu was undertaken, using much more accurate information, computerized data, and the astronomical almanac, which gives us more reliable values for the changes in the Earth's tilt. Professor Niels Steed and Dr. Oswaldo Riviera analyzed not only the eastern sunrise points of the structure, but also the western sunset alignments for the solstices. They concluded that all four cornerstones of the monument had been accurately positioned somewhere around 10,000 BC. Dr. Riviera resigned from his post as director of the Bolivian National Institute of Archaeology shortly after this announcement, presumably as a result of this heretical observation, a not uncommon occurrence for anyone in professional academia who dares to step too far beyond the approved timeline. What's interesting to me is that this more accurate modern date, roughly 10,000 BC, corresponds very closely to a significant period in Earth's history, that of the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, occurring some 12,900 years ago. Most likely the result of multiple impacts from a fragmenting comet, it caused catastrophic climate change, drove the huge rise in sea levels, plunged parts of the world into glacial conditions for nearly a millennia, and corresponds to the extinction of hundreds of species of megafauna. In a previous video, we took a deep dive into the effects of the Younger Dryas on South America by analysing a recent scientific paper looking at a site in Chile. The link to the video is below. Not only did this study show significant impact proxies in the strata, it indicated a massive extinction event in South America of more than 80% of megafauna, and it demonstrated a dramatic change in climate, both up and down the average temperature scale in various regions. When we combine the modern astro-archaeological date of 10,000 BC or 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas Cataclysm of around 13,000 years ago, and Poznański's reporting of both brief glacial periods and consequent dramatic climate change, we can start to paint a picture for what might have occurred here. Is it not possible that the Younger Dryas Cataclysm itself brought on the glacial conditions that ended the first period at Tiwanaku? As temperature graphs show, this cold period was geologically very brief, around 1,000 years, and then the Earth warmed very rapidly. As the glaciers melted in the Andes, filling Lake Titicaca to the shores of Tiwanaku, the climate had also warmed. Could this time in the past have given birth to the bounty of the second and third periods at Tiwanaku? This warming would have taken place right around 10,000 BC, which corresponds to the alignment and astronomical dating of the site. I think Poznański might well have been right in his assertions for the vast age of Tiwanaku, and it seems like modern science, particularly in fields outside of archaeology, are agreeing with him. It is just speculation, but very much like Plato's story for the sinking of Atlantis at 9600 BC, aligning with Meltwater Pulse 1b and the end of the Younger Dryas, it is quite a remarkable coincidence that the dates for Tiwanaku line up so very well with those produced by modern research into the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas. Against all this evidence for a more ancient origin of Tiwanaku, mainstream academia has used a few C14 radiocarbon dated remains and the results of a process called obsidian hydration dating to outright dismiss Poznański's work. While these methods are undoubtedly useful, they're also not without their drawbacks. Carbon-14 dating doesn't work on stone and may only give you dates for the last campfire or for the last person to be interred in the ground. Both carbon-14 and obsidian hydration dating also rely on the use of constants in their calculation, when in reality these constant values can vary over time. Cosmic events, supernovas, or solar activity can affect the rate of carbon decay, and obsidian hydration dating assumes a constant rate of water absorption, which, as we've seen, likely varied in the extreme on the Altiplano as it underwent significant climate change over time. On the other hand, Poznański undertook a huge multidisciplinary approach, combining geology, astronomy, cultural, anthropological, and paleontological methods over 50 years to come to his conclusions. He dedicated his life to studying and to preserving the great enigmatic ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and he and his work deserve to be taken seriously. Amongst the amazing relics of ancient civilizations, Tiwanaku stands as unique. There's nothing quite like it found anywhere else on the planet. So was Tiwanaku, as Arthur Poznański labelled it, the cradle of American man? There's certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that it might well have been, and that it may well be far older than our modern orthodox dating suggests. Hopefully, future generations of researchers and archaeologists can continue to work on this site with open minds, considering the full impact of adjacent sciences, to uncover the truth that likely lies still undiscovered, waiting patiently beneath the sediment and soil of the remote Altiplano of the Andes. Thanks for watching.
This is the Altiplano in Bolivia, in the high Andes, and I'm showing this photograph really to indicate how sparsely populated the Altiplano is, how few people live there at an altitude of more than 12,000 feet above sea level. It's not the kind of terrain that can support a large population. Crops are grown, but they come out of the ground stunted and the yield is extremely low. As a result, very few people live on the Altiplano today. And there's a mystery in that and a problem in that, and it's to do with the city of Tiwanaku, which stands on the Altiplano at an altitude of 12,500 feet above sea level. Here's a bit of Tiwanaku. This is the piece of Tiwanaku that's called the Pumapunku, and it consists of absolutely enormous blocks of stone. I mean, they're just unimaginably large. This piece has been calculated to weigh 400 tons. And I can't understand, I just don't see it within orthodox historical explanation, how at this altitude above sea level, 12,500 feet, where you cannot grow crops to support a large population who could haul those stones into place, and I don't know if 400-ton blocks could be hauled into place by anybody, how this could have been done at that altitude and in that location, and why it was done. I think that the city of Tiwanaku is one of the most mysterious sites in the world. In a way, it's the New World equivalent of Giza. It's a site about which there are far more questions than answers, and a site about which the dating needs to be seriously re-examined. The dating of Tiwanaku by Orthodox archaeologists has for a long time been set at around 500 AD, just about 1500 years ago. Although more recently, there are some archaeologists working in the area who have daringly sought to push that date back, and there are a few who've stuck their neck out and said that Tiwanaku may go back as far as 2000 BC. The difference of opinion amongst the scholars in itself shows how little we know about this site. The conventional view that dates it to 500 AD is based on the classical study by Professor Max Hugh, who's always cited as the great authority on Tiwanaku. I was surprised to discover that his influential book on Tiwanaku had been written without him ever having found the need to actually visit the site himself. Another scholar also worked on the site, Professor Arthur Poznansky from La Paz University, and he not only visited Tiwanaku, he lived there. He lived there for the best part of 50 years, and he took very careful measurements of every aspect of the site. And he studied in particular the astronomical alignments of the site. We're looking at one of the Tiwanaku structures, the Kalasasea here, photographed in the afternoon with the sun setting towards the west. There's another astronomical phenomenon that can be used for dating monuments, and it's called the obliquity of the ecliptic. The Earth has a tilt. The axis of the Earth is tilted, and this tilt, although not many of us know it, changes very slowly like that. It nods in space in a slow cycle of about 41,000 years. And the effect of the changing obliquity is to cause the sunrise, the position of sunrise at either of the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year, to change very slowly along the horizon. And if you can establish that certain structures were aligned to a solstitial rising of the sun by a people who normally were extremely accurate in what they did, and if that alignment is out, it's suggestive of an older date for the site. Poznansky, to howls of derision from his fellow scholars, pointed out that the solstitial alignments of certain monuments in Tiwanaku were out, and when he calculated the time when those alignments would have been perfectly exact, he came to around 12,000 years ago. And he suggested daringly that Tiwanaku might be the oldest city in the world, that it might originally have been laid out and aligned to the solstitial risings of the sun 12,000 or more years ago. Of course, his view is not accepted. It's universally ridiculed by our scholars. And yet there are aspects of the Tiwanaku site which strongly support the notion that it's extremely ancient. One of them is this monument, known as the Gateway of the Sun. All these names that are given to structures at Tiwanaku are entirely arbitrary because we know nothing about the people who built Tiwanaku. When the Spanish first arrived in the Andes, they asked the Incas, "Did you build these monuments?" And the Incas laughed. They said, "No way, we didn't build these monuments. These monuments were built thousands of years ago by the gods." Well, such ideas are considered to be whimsy by our scholars, and yet they may not be whimsy. Let's have a look on the reverse of the Gateway of the Sun. And what I want to draw attention to here is this feature, this frieze that is carved on the reverse of the Gateway of the Sun, and this particular aspect of it here. I don't think I'm hallucinating. I think that I'm looking at two large ears, two eyes, a trunk, and two tusks. In other words, I think that I'm looking at the face of some sort of elephant. If I am looking at the face of some sort of elephant, then there's a real problem with the dating of this site, because there have not been any elephant-like creatures in the New World for a very long time. In fact, you have to go back to around 10,000 BC, around 12,000 years ago, to find a creature that fits that bill. And that creature, here's a biological reconstruction drawing of it, was called Cuvier-Onius. It was one of those great Ice Age mammals that became extinct suddenly and dramatically at the end of the last Ice Age. Could we be looking at a drawing, a carving of Cuvier-Onius done from life long before history began? And here, another ancient piece of stone from Tiwanaku. Very faded, very worn down. But let's trace out this figure that appears on it. There's the two hind legs, the two front legs, the open mouth, the uplifted snout, the ears, the curved back, and the tail of an apparently unidentifiable species of mammal. It doesn't look anything like any animal that runs around in the Andes today. But it does look very like an extinct mammal, and that mammal was called Toxodon. There's a biological reconstruction drawing of Toxodon, and Toxodon, like Cuvier-Onius, became extinct at around 12,000 years ago, and prior to that had been found plentifully in the area of Tiwanaku. With these kind of carvings and the astronomical dating done by Poznański, I think there's a prima facie case for a complete re-examination of what Tiwanaku might really be and how old it might be and what it might mean. And there is other evidence that points in that direction as well. We're looking at Lake Titicaca here and at one of those reed boats. And Lake Titicaca today is 12 miles away and 100 feet lower than Tiwanaku. And yet, even Orthodox archaeologists agree that Tiwanaku was built originally as a port on the shores of Lake Titicaca. There's massive harbor constructions to be found at Tiwanaku, and there's really no doubt that it was built as a port. So the question is, how long does it take a lake like Lake Titicaca to recede in depth by 100 feet and 12 miles away from the edge of the city of Tiwanaku? I discussed this problem with geologists from the British Geological Survey working in that area. Oddly enough, they didn't know about Tiwanaku, but they did know about Lake Titicaca. And they told me that that amount of recession of that particular lake would have taken at least 10,000 years. So another science, geology, is pointing to a far greater antiquity for the city of Tiwanaku than is accepted by our scholars today.
Welcome to my writing room. The short video that follows, filmed by my wife Santha on our recent research trip to Peru, is intended to give only a first quick glimpse of Peru's extraordinary coastal pyramid cities. 4 of them are featured here: Banduria and Caral, both with drone footage, and Penico and Aspero. When Santha and I first visited Aspero in 1993, it was still almost completely covered under the municipal rubbish dump of the nearby city of Supe. Today, thanks to the work of brilliant Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady Solis and her team, Aspero has been largely cleared, and excavations continue. Among the 4 sites featured in the video, Penico is thought to be the youngest, dated to roughly 3,600 to 3,900 years ago. However, Banduria, Caral, and Aspero are significantly older. Radiocarbon dates place their earliest monumental constructions between approximately 5,700 and 4,600 years ago. The step pyramids of Caral, Banduria, and Aspero are thus as old or older than the officially accepted dates for the oldest of the Egyptian pyramids, as old or older than the oldest ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, and roughly contemporaneous with the rise of early urbanism in the Indus Valley. What's being discovered in Peru is rewriting world history, which is precisely why these mysterious coastal cities, alongside equally mysterious sites in Egypt, Iraq, India, and China, will have an honored place in the new book I've been researching and writing for the past year. I'll be posting further updates as the work continues.